The public school system, in many ways, maybe almost in every way, is indoctrination camps. These are indoctrination camps, and their focus, the ultimate thing that they're attacking, you might think it's conservatives, you might think it's Republicans, you might think it's Donald Trump. It's Jesus Christ. It is faith. It is about undoing everything, all the biblical teachings, removing those from people's lives through means of secularism.
But before we get into our conversation, my name is Eric Metaxas, and this channel exists to bring you a biblical perspective on today's news, culture, and hot-button issues. If you're new here or not, welcome, and be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so you are notified when new videos get posted. First of all, headline, you are the host of the Candace Owens podcast. But I mean,
now it's just the Candace podcast.
Is that right?
Yeah, Candace
Okay.
podcast.
But who else would be the host of the Candace podcast? You'd be that person. But I want to talk to you about everything. First of all, let's talk about your faith. There's a cross behind you. I have always known you to be a woman of faith. Sometimes people don't know our stories. What is your story? And I hate that's like cliche. What's your story? But what is your story of coming to faith? Were you raised in the faith? Did your Christian faith become important to you, particularly important at a certain point? I'm always curious about that part of a person's story.
Yeah, I think I follow the journey of a lot of people. I'm very grateful that during my formative years, my grandparents were very involved in my life. I lived with my grandparents, and they were Christians. And when I say Christians, I mean every single morning, me and my sisters and my brother had to study the Bible. That was like breakfast. Granddad made breakfast, and we had to study the Bible. And it wasn't, of course, particularly relevant to me at the time when he was asking us Bible questions. We were just trying to win a mug. Like, he would make hot chocolate in a mug, and according to which mug you got, it meant how you were being ranked according to your answers. And then I would say that once I got into middle school, my grandfather was very against secularism, and now I see for good reason. I was quite embarrassed about my grandparents. I was quite embarrassed about having faith. I was quite embarrassed about having studied the Bible, and I did everything to rinse myself of that, and very much became a person that went the way of the world, just trying to be cool, just trying to be relevant. You kind of have to be like, Bible Belt Christians are weird. And so I followed pretty much that ideology, I would say all through college, until in 2013, my grandmother died quite unexpectedly. We really were not expecting her to die. She was always the family matriarch. My grandfather was the patriarch. We thought she was just going into the hospital for a couple of days, and then she never came out. And it was sort of this jarring moment in my life that I would say began my reversion back to faith, which I guess that's scripture, right? It's a biblical proverb that if you raise up a child in the way they should be raised, in the end they will return. And I think I was very much that story. And I was quite embarrassed that I felt, or I guess not embarrassed, but ashamed that I wasn't the person. I didn't feel that my grandmother got to see me become the person that she would have wanted me to be. And that shame, I think, is what led me back to the church. And I didn't really know where to begin with that. And I would say that shortly thereafter, I guess you could say 4 years thereafter, I was just really surrounded by a lot of evangelicals. I think that it's particularly in America, when you're getting involved in politics and you're on the conservative side, there are a lot of evangelical Christians. And I was grateful that they guided my faith in a way that it needed to be guided. And I had a platform and felt comfortable, again, talking about my faith and talking about my beliefs. And then I would say marrying my husband, I guess, was the next big step. And my husband was raised in the Anglican Church, and he made a decision after studying theology at Oxford to convert while he was in school to the Catholic faith. And that's a big deal in England. I'll tell you that. It's not, wouldn't be as much of a big of a deal, I think, here in America, but that was like, sit down, have a conversation with your parents. You don't just convert to the Catholic faith in England, given the history. And he did. We got married, and we were content to be different. We were quite literally going to different churches, but I got really curious about the Catholic faith and wanted to sort of challenge my prevailing ideas about the Catholic faith because of what it was just doing in my husband's life. He just blossomed. He goes to Mass every day. And so he made me curious about the Catholic faith, and I began study. Things were also happening, current events that made me more curious about the Catholic faith, and it led me to my baptism into the Catholic Church.
So you're probably not aware that it's a cult. Am I getting that right? You probably didn't. You didn't get that far, man. We got to talk. Okay, so seriously, folks, when you talk, it's so interesting when you talk about Anglicans in England. That story, I mean, you can go back to Cardinal Newman. It's such an interesting thing when you study the history of the church. And recently, I've gotten to know Calvin Robinson in England, who he's sort of still an Anglican, but it's fascinating. We probably don't want to get too deep into that right now, but I know that your faith is everything to you and that it informs who you are, because a lot of people just know you as a political figure. You're somebody that talks about politics, but I think you and I agree that apart from revival, there's no hope. Like at the heart of everything, we have to have revival. You can't restore America to the founder's vision unless you have enough people understand where all of that came from. And we currently don't have enough people who understand where that came from. But I still want to talk about you and your story. Let's talk about Blexit. Talk about what that is and about your awakening politically just a few years ago, really.
Yeah, I always say now that you stumble on little truths before you end up at the truth. And if you start pursuing truth, you will inevitably end up at faith, and you realize that that's what's happening. And so, Blexit was a part of my political journey in waking up to a big truth, right? A big truth that Black Americans were being lied to, that Black Americans were very much being abused by the system and quite ironically relying on the system to fix their abuses. There was this sort of paradoxical the government did this to us, but the government will be able to fix everything for us. And the more I started clawing through history, I recognized how much I had been brainwashed throughout my public schooling. It is my perspective that the public school system, in many ways, maybe almost in every way, is indoctrination camps. That these are indoctrination camps, and their focus, the ultimate thing that they're attacking, you might think it's conservatives, you might think it's Republicans, you might think it's Donald Trump. It's Jesus Christ. It is faith. It is about undoing everything, all the biblical teachings, removing those from people's lives through means of secularism. And so when I arrived at Blexit and understanding how much Black Americans had been lied to, I had arrived at the destruction of the family unit. And I had arrived at historically understanding what happened with welfarism and was very shocked at how much the school system had lied about why it is that Black Americans are suffering so much today. And of course, it makes sense they would lie because they are the authors. They are the authors of the Black American fate, so to speak, of what we're living through in society today. And I wanted to take a bold approach because I was at first very angry about being at first a victim of those lies, believing sort of that liberals and liberalism was the solution and that Republicans and conservatives had always had it backwards. And when I felt strong on my 2 feet in terms of the history, like ready to go out and to debate these topics, I created an organization behind me, Blexit, as a vehicle for other Black Americans who were perhaps having the same awakening or who would later have an awakening to know that, first and foremost, you're not alone, because that's the first thing. It's so isolating to be a Black conservative if you don't fall in line with the media perspectives of what it means to be a Black person. And it blossomed. And it's blossoming even more. It seems like every day Black Americans are starting to wake up, all Americans, to the media deceptions and are becoming more properly educated in terms of all of the division that we have in society today. And yeah, it's been an amazing organization, but we always talk about faith. That is the pinnacle of the Blexit movement is recognizing that at first they removed God, and as soon as they remove faith, then they attack the second pillar, which is the family. And that is the ultimate goal, which is to isolate the individual, to make the individual believe that they can be their own God. and that the government can provide solutions.
It is. It's so astonishing to me. I remember when I read many years ago that liberal New York Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan had done a report in the mid-'60s on the destruction of the black family and how this was going to lead to every kind of evil, and how the Democratic Party basically told him, shut up, we're not interested. And it's an amazing thing because they've stuck with that narrative. And I think right now we're living in an historic moment where just many Americans, not just black Americans, are waking up to the fact that we have swallowed these lies. We've been part of the problem. But people are waking up. You have led the way in many ways for many people. When we come back, I want to talk more about that. Folks, I'm talking to Candace Owens. She's the host of the Candace podcast. Don't go away. Let's talk about Juneteenth. A lot of people have no clue what that is. Help my audience understand what that is.
Well, the truth is that it's another way to patronize Black Americans. I think this was given by Joe Biden, this holiday, so to speak, first and foremost because it's a two-prong approach. They're able to further divide Americans along race lines, and also because they wanted to give this sort of offer this fake appeasement to end the BLM riots that they were the source of, right? So you rioted, racism's back, it's terrible, George Floyd riots, we were burning down everything. This is all happening because Donald Trump is president and the nation cannot heal while Donald Trump is president. Which is the first thing he does when he gets into office, Joe Biden, is he's like, well, let's forget all the race stuff. I know we've been encouraging you to burn down your own neighborhoods. Don't do that anymore because, look, we've got this shiny new holiday for you. So now not only are you going to get a month, but you're going to get Juneteenth, which is to remind you that you are different from the rest of Americans still, but also to remind you that we, the government, cares about you. And so it's just more of the same nonsense that they have been doing forever with Black Americans. And you will still find Black voices in the media that will pretend that this is it. Now, of course, we can heal because we've been given this day. Now, of course, we can heal because we've been given this by the government. And I'm hopeful that people are seeing it for what it is. And look, another federal holiday, more kids out of school, the last thing we need, especially when you take a look at the literacy rates in America, particularly in Black America and inner cities. Less schooling is definitely not going to be a solve for anything.
But talk for a minute about what Juneteenth is meant to signify.
Well, what they say on paper it's meant to signify is this was actually true Black independence, because Black people are not supposed to be celebrating the 4th of July because when obviously the 4th of July, Black Americans didn't truly get their freedom in this country. And so it's taking a very literal look at the Revolutionary War, taking a very literal look and saying, well, when do we think actually things were right? And this, by the way, this could be never ending, right? You could say that next what will be up is they're going to call it Gay Independence Day, which it should be coming because they've got a whole month now. So then they're going to say, well, we didn't truly have our independence until we had the right to marry with the Supreme Court decision. Right. So our day is going to be different. I mean, it's never ending when you start looking at it through that lens.
It's the celebration, let's face it, and this is why it's evil. It's the celebration of victimism, of victimhood. It's the constant drumbeat, the 1619 Project, that will never, ever let go of these things, as though we have to somehow wallow in the fact that we were abused or victimized. We can never celebrate in a beautiful way. It always has to have this tinge of bitterness to it. Actually, because I haven't talked to you in a while, you've been really bold, delightfully, gloriously bold on talking about George Floyd. I was so amazed at that because there's so many people that shrink from, I mean, there was this clip from a few years ago, Speaker Johnson talking about, it was obviously murder. He says that. And then he says to whoever, whatever mainstream host was interviewing him, that we must have systemic change. And I thought to myself, what a nightmare. And how many Republicans get sucked into this lie that somehow this is all legitimate and we need systemic change, whatever that means. But you were really bold in saying what actually happened with George Floyd.
Right. And it was in many ways heard all around the world, 100 million views. And Facebook has never been the same. You're not allowed to go viral like that on Facebook anymore because it disrupted this narrative that they were trying to create. And what upset me the most was just this bizarre martyrdom. Like they were making it seem as though quite literally people were getting baptized in George Floyd Square, as if he was a Jesus Christ. I hate to say that because it's so blasphemous to even suggest this, but that is very much what the media was doing. They were trying to turn him into this martyr, this icon, and to tell people to baptize themselves in the legend of George Floyd. And it was very much a legend. I mean, this was a person who, at best, and if we're being as understanding as we can, he was complex because he had true drug addiction, and that is sad. That's the most compassion that we can have for the situation, is that this should have been a story about drug abuse in America. This should have been a story, if you're going to talk about turning against anybody, it should have been Big Pharma. It should have been against the opioid crisis. This was a fentanyl addict who could not get away from his own addictions. But the truth of the matter is he asked to be put on the ground. He was resisting arrest. The police were not hunting him down. They were called because he was using a counterfeit bill, and he had been in trouble many times in the past and had used that exact same phrase when he was being arrested. Oh, I can't breathe. Oh, I'm scared. I want, I want my mommy, which was a name that he used for his girlfriend. And I was able to do a documentary and slow that down for people to show them how much the media had lied, or how much the media had honestly committed a great evil by omission, by not allowing people access to the facts because they wanted to insist upon this narrative that they knew would spell disunity and anger all throughout the country.
There's a fearlessness to you, which I cannot help but admire very much, that you're willing to talk about things or ask questions that other people are afraid to because they're afraid they're going to get attacked. That happened even when you questioned the narrative on Israel. I mean, it's interesting to me that we live in a culture where you have to be so careful if you say the wrong thing, even in your own tribe, even in people that you'd agree with them on something, but you ask something that you shouldn't ask. And when we come back, I want to ask you where you got that from, that ability to say, I'm not going to worry about what people are going to say. I'm going to speak the truth. You were just touching on all of these narratives that have been pushed down our throats. I mean, you go way back to the narrative that, the Democratic Party is great for black people, lie, to where we are today, that the vaccine is great, get the vaccine, COVID was not created in a lab, the election was not stolen, shut up, we can't talk about that. We have been living through real history in this country where people over and over and over again are waking up and saying, the world that I lived in, I bought a lot of lies, and it's a little traumatic to process that and to think, where do I go from here? Well, what gives you hope, in a sense, in America? Because this has been a traumatic few years for a lot of people to try to process what this country has become, what these institutions, we used to have, journalists used to behave like journalists, doctors used to behave like doctors. Something has happened. We're in, I would say, and I think you'd agree, ultimately it's a spiritual crisis.
That's exactly right. And I think that actually is what gives me hope, because you realize it's not left versus right. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's goodness versus evil. And if you are on the side of goodness and you have faith and you believe in God, then you should rest assured that we win in the end. And I'm so tremendously happy that the scales are falling from people's eyes. And I know that moment can make you feel like you're going through cognitive dissonance. You realize everything that you've been told is a lie. The media is a part of the state, and they're lying to you perpetually to get you to comply with what the state incentives are. But that's the beginning of you really getting closer to truth, right? And so for me, every day, I just go, thank goodness that I am not subjected to that I don't believe the media when they call this a conspiracy theory. Thank goodness I don't have to listen to any of that nonsense anymore. Look, what I want to say, the bottom line is I tell my listeners, trust your gut, okay? Your gut is actually, that's God-given, right? So everything else, all of the nonsense is them trying to override what you may innately know to be true. They're constantly trying to override that and to pollute your mind over and over again by saying things that are ridiculous until they become true. And to remain happy and positive and focused, because we're Christians, right? In the end, we win.
That is so beautiful. We've just got a minute left. Let me ask you a really plebeian question. Do you think Biden will be the nominee in November, or do you think the Democrats realize there's no way he can win and they're going to kind of switch him with someone?
I think they always believe there's a way that he can win because I think that they've been engineering elections for a long time. So I'd be concerned when they're talking about the new bird flu pandemic that they're starting to float right now. And so I'm paying attention to what tricks they're going to get up to because they got up to a lot of tricks in 2020. Look, I don't think they mind that he's completely senile and that he's obviously going through, I would say, quite an advanced stage of dementia right now. Because that's what they want. They want a shell. Obviously, he's not the person that's in control. He's not the person that's calling the shots. They want somebody that they can just walk all over, and that's what he's been. So if they can get him over the finish line, they could care less. They'll keep him away from the press, as they have done.
Well, that alone obviously is unconstitutional, and that's what bothers me is that people say, well, he's clearly unfit. And I'm thinking, what are you talking about? If he's fit, he's evil. If he's unfit, there are people around him who are evil. They're doing evil things. And the idea that he hasn't really been president from day one, that you have obviously a group of people around him running things, is fundamentally unconstitutional. So even if he hadn't stolen the election, which he did, you cannot have somebody pretending to be the president when there are other people actually doing what the executive branch does. So we're living through crazy times. Candace Owens, thank you for being a voice of hope and truth and fire in the midst of the looniness. Can't wait to talk to you again, hopefully in person. God bless you.
God bless you as well. It's so great to be with you.